Band-in-a-Box 2021 for Mac is here. We've been busy and added over 80 new features and an amazing collection of new content, including 202 RealTracks, new MIDI super tracks, instrumental studies, artist performances, bonus Real Drums singles, Real Drums transcriptions now for all Real Drums, multi-styles pack 1, extra styles packs 10 and 11, and more. We also have bonus packs with 40 RealTracks in addition to the 202 new RealTracks, so in total an amazing 242 new RealTracks are available. In addition, there are over 300 new Real styles that use the new RealTracks. These include great fusion, smooth jazz, and blues with Nashville great Brent Mason, swing and shuffle vocals, modern jazz and electronic funk with Jeff Lorber, slack key guitar with Brent Mason, world music styles such as African Nanigo, Cuban Cascara, and Brazilian Partido Alto, classic guitar styles such as Dublin pop and 90s grunge, indie folk rock and 60s coffee house, new reggae RealTracks, cool new lap steel, and old-time mandolins, banjos, and fiddles. There are over 80 new features in Band-in-a-Box 2021. We've added 16 new editable utility tracks, which can be used for audio and MIDI. The mixer has been improved with many customizable display options, including embedded window and portrait chord sheet mode, track selection to display, and more. Mute and solo can now be saved or loaded with songs. You can now view audio waveforms on any track, not just the audio track, and you can copy regions of audio to utility tracks. Plug-in control has been improved with the ability to send each MIDI track to output to another track. Multiple plugins GUI windows can be displayed. Audio harmonies can be generated onto individual tracks, giving you more control over them. There's a new option to auto-fix sour notes within the polyphonic audio, either for generated RealTracks or with any audio. 24-bit audio playback, recording, mixing, and rendering is now supported in Band-in-a-Box. The chord sheet has been improved with new zoom buttons and time signature display on the part markers. And now all Real Drums have Real charts with accurate drum notation and MIDI which can trigger drum patches. There are notation enhancements including 2/2 cut time and 2/4 display. And there is now a visual transpose indicator on the main screen. Chords can be copied as a simple text format and then be pasted into another song or a text file. There are also great new features in the Band-in-a-Box DAW plugin. The DAW plugin is included with any purchase of Band-in-a-Box and allows you to use many of the great features of Band-in-a-Box right in your favorite DAW, such as Logic, GarageBand, Pro Tools, Reaper, and many more. There are 2 new very useful views in addition to the original track and chords view. Track table only or chord sheet only. There's also a feature that automatically generates the entire chord chart as markers in a MIDI file, which can be dragged into the DAW. And there are lots of other useful features like displaying multiple chord types, changing audio output channels, and more. We'll check out these new features and more for both the main program and the DAW plugin later in the video. But for now, let's check out some of the excellent new RealTracks in Band-in-a-Box 2021. Right now we're listening to one of our new Real styles featuring 2 new indie rock guitar styles from RealTracks' favorite Brent Mason. This soloist and this rhythm style. If you're new to Band-in-a-Box, I'll give you a brief introduction. Band-in-a-Box is an auto accompaniment program that allows you to type in any chord progression in any key, and it generates backing tracks for you. This is an amazing tool for practicing, songwriting, composing, teaching, and music production. And that's what you're hearing right now. Everything you're hearing here was created simply by typing in these chords, picking this style, setting the tempo, and pressing play. Band-in-a-Box then did everything, and you can enter any chord progression in any key. I'll highlight this by making a couple of changes to this chord chart. I'll completely change the chords in the first 8 bars. I'll change the first chord to the 1 major chord, D. I'll change bar 2 to the flat 7 chord, C. I'll leave bars 3 and 4. I'll make the same changes to bars 5 and 6. And I'll enter E minor 7 flat 5 in bar 7 and A7 in bar 8. I'll change the key of the whole song to E and press play. And you can see that it's playing our new progression in a completely different key, and it still sounds fantastic. Let's have a look at some of the other amazing new content in Band in a Box 2021. For jazz, blues, funk, and Latin, we've got even more styles featuring Brent Mason, including new fusion and smooth jazz soloing, and low-down blues. And there are styles in this set which also feature cool new guitar effects that have never previously been in Band in a Box, such as a rotary effect that gives the guitar a sound similar to a vintage organ. We've also expanded our Jazz Essentials RealTracks with a set focusing on RealTracks that work very well over jazz minor blues progressions. There are slack key guitar styles from Brent Mason which feature a distinctly Hawaiian sound. There are new world music styles such as Partido Alto, African Nanico, Cuban Cascara, and more. There are new age piano styles with Miles Black, and new styles from fusion legend Jeff Lorber, which include new funky synth basses and vintage electronic drums. We have some amazing new pop, rock, and world styles. We've added to our user-requested classic rock guitar styles with a set of Dublin pop, which emulates the guitar sounds that came out of Ireland in the 80s and 90s. As well as a trip to Seattle with 90s grunge. There are user-requested reggae styles. More steel drum and marimba. We have a set of 60s coffee house folk styles with guitar and a RealTracks first dulcimer. There are new gospel shout RealTracks, perfect for a rousing church service. And more of our extremely popular cinematic electric guitar styles. For country, Americana, and Celtic, we've added to our collection of vocal RealTracks with a set of swingin' shuffle vocals. We've added to our country poll winner RealTracks with Academy of Country Music Award winners including Danny Rader on guitar, Miles McPherson on Nashville pop drums, and Fred Eltrington playing Americana drums. And of course, this also includes RealTracks favorite Brent Mason, who has won the CMA Guitarist of the Year award numerous times. There is a set of old-time music featuring mandolins, fiddles, guitars, and banjo guitars, or ganjos. And there are exciting new lap steel styles with Nashville great Eddie Dunlap. Now let's have a detailed look at the new features of the program itself. I'm first going to talk about the GUI, or Graphical User Interface, basically the first thing you see when you open the program. For those of you familiar with Band in a Box, you'll see some pretty major improvements. The mixer can be embedded in the main screen, turning the chord sheet into portrait mode. And the mixer is horizontally resizable to allow more room for the chord sheet. I have it embedded here, but of course you can still have it as a floating window by pressing this button. When it's in floating mode, the mixer now can size down to be way smaller than was previously allowed. At its very smallest, it still retains some very useful functions, like displaying the master VU meter and also giving you the master control for this song or all songs. And as you increase the size, the sliders for the individual tracks start to appear, and then the full labels start to appear. In the classic screen mode, the mixer can be embedded at the top right of the screen, or you can press this button to view mixer options, and you can view the mixer in the bottom right area. The portrait mode also can be used when viewing other screens like piano roll, notation, or audio edit window, which incidentally is now able to show waveforms for all tracks, including RealTracks and RealDrums, where previously it was only able to display audio on the audio track. Which highlights another great new feature, which is that this audio window and the other windows like piano roll and notation will change the tracks they're displaying when you click on the tracks in the mixer. You can choose to either only show active tracks, or you can choose to show all tracks. And there are 16 new utility tracks, which can be used for audio, MIDI, or even additional RealTracks. I'll get into more detail about these very useful new tracks a little later. The height of these tracks can be adjusted by holding the command button down and using the scroll wheel. And if your current view means that some tracks are hidden, you can use the scroll wheel without command held down to scroll through the list of tracks. Or you can use these buttons to scroll. And the scroll wheel has other uses in the mixer as well. If your mouse is hovering over any of the sliders, the scroll wheel function changes so that it's now controlling that element. If you hold Shift while scrolling over one of these elements, it affects that element for all of the tracks, but preserves the starting point of each track, maintaining the difference between the tracks. If you hold Command while scrolling over one of these elements, it snaps them all to the same value and then adjusts them all from that starting point. Another thing you may have noticed while I was doing that was that the tracks are displaying for me in decibels, whereas in previous versions they would display the volume and pan in terms of MIDI values of 1 to 127, with 90 being flat. This now makes a lot more sense, particularly if you're mostly dealing with RealTracks, RealDrums, and audio tracks. But if you prefer the old way, you can still display using those values by selecting that in the mixer options. But for me, I think I'd prefer to leave it as decibels. You can also do it on a track-by-track basis. In addition to the only active or all tracks views that I showed earlier, you can also customize this by selecting only active, but then you can add tracks individually from the list. For example, if you wanted to record some of your own tracks, or even add additional RealTracks. There's also an option to always hide all unused tracks when playback starts. One other new feature is that you can have Band-in-a-Box save and load the solo and mute states in the mixer. If I have load, mute, and solo states with songs selected, then if I mute a couple of tracks, and I save the song, first of all, if I press New, all of the mute and solo will be off. And if I load that same song, it's preserved my mute and solo states. Most DAWs do work this way, and so this has long been a requested feature. However, Band-in-a-Box is often used in a very different way. For example, if you're a bass player practicing along with Band-in-a-Box tracks, you may want to mute the bass track and then play through a whole folder of tunes. And you'll want to keep the Band-in-a-Box bass muted regardless of what mute or solo states are or aren't saved in the songs, in which case this setting can be turned off so Band-in-a-Box will work the same way it always has. Another great thing about the embedded mixer is that if you make your tracks small enough, the space here can be utilized for a variety of purposes. Again, if you were a bass player, you could now arrange the screen so that you could have the bass fretboard display here, and open a floating notation window which could be put here. And now you can work your way through a whole folder full of songs, viewing the chords, fretboard, and notation with tab, with the bass muted so you can play the bass part. In addition to the portrait mode that you get with the embedded mixer, there are also other improvements to the main chord sheet. Previously, if you wanted to change the number of lines per page or the number of bars per line, you would need to go into the display options and change the values here. But now there are new, much easier ways to do this. If you hold down Command, the mouse scroll wheel changes the number of lines per page instantly. And holding Shift while you mouse scroll changes the number of bars per line. And these tasks can also be accomplished by using these buttons in the bottom right area of the chord sheet. Both of these are extremely useful. For myself, I find I change these settings frequently, mostly depending on how dense the chords are. That is, if there are lots of chords, I'm more inclined to view 4 bars per line. But if they're more sparse, I'm more inclined to view 8 bars per line. The main time signature now appears on the main chord chart, and appears on the chord chart for bars with time signature changes set in the bar settings dialog. The default action can be set in the display preferences. And now the visual transpose is also settable right from the main screen. If I mouse over the key of the song, if I move to the right of the key, a separate area becomes apparent. If I click there, that lets me now choose visual transpose. Since this tune has a tenor sax solo, if a tenor player were learning this, the chords and notation would need to be visually transposed. I could just pick tenor sax. Now there's a +14 indication right beside the key, and the chords displayed are showing it in E minor instead of D minor. And of course it's displaying that way in notation as well. The visual transpose can also be viewed and set within the notation view as well. We're now going to take a closer look at the utility tracks that we touched on earlier. There are several different ways you can use the utility tracks. You can record audio to them. You can record MIDI to them. You can generate RealTracks right to the utility tracks, where you can then hear and edit the RealTracks audio and view and edit the RealCharts MIDI. You can copy audio from one track to another. You can copy MIDI from one track to another. And you can generate harmonies from audio tracks, including RealTracks, and send those separated harmonies to the utility tracks. I'll now show you in more detail some ways to use utility tracks, including generating RealTracks to the utility tracks, generating harmonies on the utility tracks, and even recording your own audio to a utility track. To start with, let's have a look at using utility tracks to add RealTracks. I've got a chord progression entered in here, and I've got this hush-hop, minimal hip-hop style loaded with some cool modern synth sounds. But I'd like to give it a bit of a rustic acoustic edge as well, so I'm going to add a RealTrack on one of the utility tracks. I have my mixer set to only display tracks I'm actually using, so I'm going to use this button to actually view one of the 16 utility tracks. And then I'll right-click on it to generate a RealTrack. Now, we've recently added some new old-time RealTracks, which include banjo guitar, or ganjo, which is a banjo that's tuned like a guitar and has a very unique sound. So I'll filter by that, and I'll select this one. So I think for this style, this is going to sound good with a ton of reverb. And I really like that combo. And a new feature is that you can double-click on the track label to easily name it. So I'll do that to label this one Ganjo. And we also have some new lap steel RealTracks. So I'll try adding one of those to another utility track as well. This Americana 8ths high might be a good one to use. Now that's really cool. I'll probably do some mixing later with that so that it just kind of floats in and out. But actually some of these phrases might be kind of cool with harmonies. So I'm going to make use of the new feature that allows you to write harmonies to different utility tracks. The Audio Harmonies feature has been in previous versions of Banana Box, but up until now the harmonies would all be put along with a source on a single track. But now you can separate them to different tracks, giving you way more control. So I'll create two harmony tracks, one above, one below, and I'll put them on new utility tracks. And now I'd like some really low, grumbly, sustained bass parts to add to this. And I just happen to have an accordion here in my studio, so I'm going to record some left-hand bass parts here. And that's another great thing with the new utility tracks. You can use them to record multiple audio tracks of your own into Banana Box. So I'll press the record button, and I'll be recording to this new utility track. The VU meter is now showing, so I'll play a little just to make sure my level is okay. It's clipping a little bit, so I'll bring the level down on the audio interface I'm using. That should be good. So here goes. Alright, so now that's completely done. I'll put quite a bit of reverb on this one too, and I'll check it out. So now I just wanted to show you a bit of behind the scenes of where all this audio is located on your hard drive. You can see in the title bar that I've saved this song as Minimalist Hip Hop with Banjo, Steel, and Accordion. I saved it to its own separate folder, which is here, Hush Hop Tracks. So the Band in a Box file itself is this SGU file, Minimalist Hip Hop with Banjo, Steel, and Accordion.sgu. And then there are all of these WAV files. The WAV files are the actual utility tracks from Band in a Box. The audio files get saved automatically with the SGU with the same name, but with number 1 for utility track 1, number 2 for utility track 2, etc. This is all done automatically behind the scenes. When you close Band in a Box and then open it again and load this SGU file, any WAV files with the same name plus number 1, number 2, etc. get loaded with it as utility tracks. If you move these audio tracks or rename them, when you open the SGU, they won't be present. Since I now have all of these audio tracks that I've put onto the utility tracks, this is a good time to show you some improvements to the audio edit window itself. The scroll wheel on the mouse can be used to zoom in or out of the waveform. It's been able to do this in previous versions as well, but up until now there was only one option for the type of zooming. That is, wherever your mouse is currently located, that's where the focal point of the zoom was. However, now there's an additional option where it can zoom into the current location of the cursor instead. So now if I click over here, but I move my mouse over here and then I start to zoom in and out, it's zooming to that location rather than the location of the mouse. Many other DAWs work this way, and so if that's what you're used to using, you'd probably prefer to set it this way. There's also an option if you've selected this that when zooming it will snap the current location of the cursor to the center. So again, the cursor's there, but if I move my mouse over here and start to zoom, it snaps that location to the center. Again, these are all mostly to do with what you're used to, so you can set it to whatever is most comfortable for you. There are now cut and copy commands in the edit menu, and of course you can just use the standard hotkeys, Command-C to copy, and I'll switch to a new utility track, and Command-V to paste. This button up here is the track selector button, and you can click on it to get a list of all the tracks, and you can select the one you want. But you also don't even have to click on it. If you move your mouse over it, then you can use the scroll wheel to scroll through the tracks. And of course, as we saw earlier, you can also just click on the tracks themselves in the mixer to select those different tracks in the audio edit window. All of these things go for the other similar views such as notation and piano roll. And there are useful new hotkeys available in the audio edit window. The home and end buttons now have intuitive functions in the audio edit window. Home will move the cursor to the beginning of a track, and end will move the cursor to the end of the track. If you've got a point selected in the middle, Shift Home will select a region between the start and that point, and Shift End will select a region between that point and the end. And of course, Command A will select the whole track. We're now going to look at more new features in the notation window. Right now we're looking at the old Stephen Foster tune, Old Folks at Home, using a style from one of our new RealTracks sets, Pyre Old Timey Folk. This is a bluegrass groove with bass, mandolins, acoustic guitar, fiddle, and banjo guitar. And right now we're looking at the notation for the fiddle part. There are new improvements to the time signature button. There's a new hint when you mouse over the button with clear information about what you can do with this menu. In previous versions, the time signature button was only for the visual display, but didn't include any options for changing the actual time signature of your song. Coming to this time signature button therefore could previously be confusing, because if you came here expecting to actually change, for example, a 4/4 bar to 3/4 or 7/4, you couldn't do that, and you'd have to know to go to the F5 bar settings dialog. Now you can, and I'll show you an example of that a little later. Right now though, I'd like to focus on this upper area, which doesn't actually change the music you're hearing, but changes the way it's displayed. The area now has a lot more information about what these changes are, and it's added two new options, 2/4 and cut time. Cut time would be very useful for the song we're looking at right now. It's 16th based, and you'd count it as 1, 2, 3, 4, with each of those quarter notes being broken into 16th note subdivisions. However, when you see bluegrass and Celtic music written out, it quite often treats each of these notes as eighth notes. In the past, the way to get these notes to display like that would be to use all of the RealTracks as halftime RealTracks. However, there's now a much easier way to get this view, and that's simply to select Cut Time. Now we're seeing this, and what were previously 16th notes are now 8th notes. The time signature displays with a better size. The height of the time signature fills the whole height of the staff. I'm now going to show you a use for the 2/4 time signature. 2/4 was often used in ragtime, so I've loaded up the Scott Joplin tune, The Easy Winners, from the Classical MIDI Fakebook, and just for fun I paired it with some cool gypsy jazz RealTracks. So the song was entered in 4/4 time, but I can now easily change it to 2/4. Again, it doesn't adjust what you're hearing at all, just how it displays. In this case, it didn't change 16ths to 8ths, but it put an extra bar line in at beat 3. So without changing the MIDI or how the RealTracks are arranged, it's displaying in 2/4 without changing the music at all. Incidentally, there's another new feature where pushes now work a lot better for swing eighths real drums, like this gypsy jazz swing. I'm going to return to our Old Folks at Home song to show some improvements to the lyrics features. There are two types of lyrics in Band in a Box, note-based lyrics and bar-based lyrics. Note-based lyrics, like these, have each syllable of the lyrics attached to notes on the melody track. This is useful in that when you're viewing the lyrics in the big lyrics window, the syllables show up at exactly the right time. Bar-based lyrics work by having chunks of lyrics attached to each bar in the song. And there's a new feature to auto-convert note-based lyrics to bar-based lyrics. And we can now see what was previously the note-based lyrics are now bar-based lyrics. The benefit of bar-based lyrics is that this is much easier to enter in Band in a Box, and you can even copy and paste in whole songs as long as the text is organized correctly. Another benefit is that it appears in both the notation window and can display in the main chord chart if the lyric layer is activated. The one downside previously has been that bar-based lyrics did not appear in the big lyrics window, but a new feature now has bar-based lyrics displaying here. There are many improvements to the RealTracks and RealDrums. A very exciting new feature is the ability to auto-fix sour notes within a polyphonic RealTracks part. This means that if a chord is played with multiple notes at once, this feature can fix just certain notes within that chord, so that the notes won't clash with the chord progression and other RealTracks. This is a setting that you can apply to any RealTrack, and it will be a blanket setting for the whole track. Right now I've got a demo for a new reel style that features one of our new 90s jam rock acoustic guitars, and it also contains one of the oldest RealTracks. Pedal Steel Background Even 85 was one of the 3 first RealTracks we ever released. This pedal steel and others like it work great over pop and country changes, but sometimes don't play the best material over the more uncommon chords like augmented or diminished chords. I'll show you what I mean by changing the chord at bar 7 to a C-sharp augmented chord. I'll press play to generate, and I'll also open the piano window so we can see the notes being played. So the notes of a C-sharp augmented chord are C-sharp, F, and A, but there was a G-sharp note in there that definitely clashes with the chord. So I'm going to go to the mixer, track settings, auto fix sour notes, and there are some options here. Song chords would force all notes to be only notes from the current chord. This is a little extreme for what I want here, as there are lots of great passing tones the pedal steel plays, and this would cram them all into chord tones. Key signatures may work in some instances, and actually would probably work here to change a G sharp to an A, but the setting I find most useful is song key signature and chords. That way it will still follow the chords if you put in some chords that go even further out of the current key, but generally will allow notes within the current key. The feature also takes key signature changes into account, which is a great feature and an important thing to note when you're putting together your song. If your song actually has key changes, it's worthwhile putting an actual key signature change in the bar settings F5 dialog. There are also other options for specific scales or chords that might not have anything to do with the current song, as well as other specific parameters. But this song key signatures and chords I think will be great for this. So I'll regenerate. And now it's playing the correct notes over that C-sharp augmented chord. The feature can also be applied to any audio track, including all of the new utility tracks. And in the case of utility tracks, you can also apply it to small regions at a time. For example, I added a trumpet soloist to this new style from Extra Styles Pack 11, Creator, and I put it on utility track 1. And there was a phrase that just got played that, while it wasn't necessarily a sour note, it was kind of a bluesy note. And I don't really want that kind of vibe on this song here. So I can go to Edit and fix sour notes. I'll use song key signatures. And it's a very subtle difference, but I think it suits the song better this way. So you can see that using these utility tracks is a great way to take RealTracks parts and fine-tune them to get them exactly as you want them. There are a few other useful new features related to RealTracks. There is a new feature that now allows medleys that have a mixture of mono and stereo RealTracks to work with panning settings, which was not previously allowed. For example, I've put a piano, which is stereo, along with this acoustic guitar, which is mono, together in a medley on the same track playing simultaneously, and they're panned largely left and right. There are new options for avoiding transposition of RealTracks. When RealTracks are generated, some of the material you hear may not have been recorded in the same key you're hearing it at. It may have been transposed from what was originally recorded. Now, while it's not always possible to avoid this, there has long been a setting in Band in a Box that allows you to set the current song to avoid transposition where possible. So you can get the best possible audio quality, though this does mean less variation within the individual RealTracks. There are now new settings that allow you to specify this for particular tracks. As well as a global setting in Preferences, Overrides. The plug-in control on the mixer is also now improved. Right now I've got a new all MIDI style loaded. There are lots of new MIDI styles available with Band in a Box 2021, including 2 more sets of Look Ma, More MIDI, as well as all MIDI styles to go along with our new MIDI Super Tracks. And it's one of these styles we're listening to right now. This style features 2 new MIDI Super Tracks and then 3 tracks using the classic Band in a Box MIDI style patterns. The plugin tab of the mixer now looks way better. In Band in a Box 2020 and earlier, the plugins were kind of crammed together in an awkward way, but now the different slots for the 4 available plugins for each track are now more clearly delineated and just look better and more intuitive. We can see that for 4 of the tracks, I'm using Plogue Arts Forsando to use our high Q sounds. And for the brass, I'm just using the built-in Mac sounds. You can now open plugin windows by right-clicking on the plugin slot, so I'll look at the piano, and you can now view multiple plugin GUI windows, so I'll check out the bass as well. And as mentioned, the brass is using the built-in Mac sounds. One new very useful feature is that for any track you can send the output to a different track. For example, the guitar right now is using Sforzando, but I can easily send it to the plugin on the brass track instead, so it will be playing the built-in Mac sounds instead. I'm going to solo the piano to highlight some additional new features. There is an option to attenuate synth output volume and panning. This changes the gain of the plugin's audio output based on the volume and panning controls on the mixer. When this is enabled, MIDI controllers for volume will not be sent to the plugin. To show you what this means, I'll turn that off for now. You can see that right now when I move the slider, it's making the CC7 volume control on the plugin go up and down. That's what's controlling the volume right now. With Attenuate Synth Output, it instead is just controlling the overall signal from the plugin itself in the mixer. This setting is useful for plugins that do not respond to MIDI controllers and also means that the volume will generally work in Band-in-a-Box for MIDI more like it works for RealTracks. The two other settings below have similar functions. Filter Synth Output basically lets the tone control in the mixer affect the signal from the plugin, and Send Synth Output to Master Reverb also means you'll be able to control reverb for MIDI tracks in the same way that you do for RealTracks. Another requested feature is that Wave's VST plugins are also now supported. There are new options for intros. The feature that automatically generates an intro for your song has been in Band-in-a-Box a long time, and last year we added new options with just drum intros or just drum and bass, or just bass. There are now even more options available, with bass, then bass and drums, or drums, then bass and drums, or any of the other instruments by themselves, or any combination of the available instruments. Right now I've got a demo loaded for a couple of the RealTracks in our Classic Guitars Dublin Pop set. This features 2 of the 9 RealTracks available in this set. I particularly like this Mag Spacey guitar. For this RealTrack, instead of the guitarist using a pick, he used a magnetic electronic device with the right hand to activate the strings. The result is a cool, otherworldly sound. So I'm going to go into the Intros dialog to apply one of these options. Bass, then bass and drums. So we can see it's now given me an intro, and it's used the Band-in-a-Box shorthand, period, to indicate instruments are all resting, except B here for bass, and then at bars 3 and 4, BD for bass and drums. I'm now going to try the custom option. And I'll select just drums and guitar 2. There are also new options for the lead-in, that is the 2 bars that are usually a drum count-in. Previously, this has been a global setting, and it still is, and I have my global setting set to not play count-ins. But now there are new options in song settings for just the current song. So even though I have my global setting set to not play count-ins, I can turn it on for this song only, and I can pick a specialized option like A pattern and fill. And this whole combo box is actually duplicated in the Intros dialog as well. So it played a count-in, which was really 2 bars of drums, then our custom intro, and then into the song.